Thank you, and thanks for having me. I look forward to a good conversation on leadership in its many forms. I congratulate those of you that are pursuing your MBA here. As an MBA myself, I found it to be invaluable throughout my career, so congratulations on that. Today, I'm going to frame my conversation on leadership under the theme of leadership being like climbing the peak of a mountain. So we'll call that Peak Leadership, Lessons from Obama. And you will find soon that I only use my own pictures with one exception. This is a selfie that my son took while flying his Super Hornet over California. So I needed a picture of a peak. And since Obama was famous for doing a selfie on one of his recent trips, I figured that it would fit right in to have a selfie of my son. But it's climbing those peaks and what we learn from them. I should say that my first visit to Japan was in 1986. Here I am at the Nissan manufacturing plant. And I was here to study Japanese finance many years ago and have been back many times since. So we very much appreciate your country. I should also say that our school, amongst its graduates, includes Makushima-san, who is one of your members of your House of Representatives. So we're pleased to have an alum of our school that is now serving in your diet. But I've orchestrated this presentation just for you, reinforced exclusively with my own photos, to, in this case, shed light on how we have many deficits in this world. In America, we have a big budget deficit, we have trade deficit, we have a jobs deficit, but I would say the biggest deficit we have is a leadership deficit, leadership of the scale necessary to address the very significant challenges that we face, both as Japan and America. And today, we're going to be taking our specific lessons from President Obama. And we're going to be looking at some things he's done well and some things he's done not so well, because you can learn lessons from both of those cases. Whether you're leading a band, leading a family, leading an NGO, leading a company, leading a country, it's absolutely vital and necessary to be able to have leadership. But I can tell you that I think the toughest leadership is political leadership. I've had success leading a family. I have 4 wonderful children, one of which is obviously flying jets for the US Navy, one which fights corruption in Brazil, one which raises money for challenged children in Washington, and one which helps commerce. But the only thing I can tell you about success in leading a family is pick the right spouse, since I give my wife all the credit. On the NGO front, I started an organization called the Economic Club of Minnesota because I felt there was more need to educate even the elite on the importance of trade and open markets. And as part of that, we went from 0 to Bernanke as a speaker in 36 months. And I know if you have a good idea, and if you can find a couple of supporters to help you get started and sell it and organize it, you can lead in an NGO capacity. And I also know, having been a leader at Macy's and also helping Pillsbury buy a little company called Häagen-Dazs and spread it around the world, that in business, they usually put one person in charge, and that makes it easier to lead. That person has to lead, but that's leadership as well. But in politics, when you have all the competing ideas out there of which way you should go in different countries with their own view as to which way you should go, and each decision is important and affects so many people, that's the toughest type of leadership, and I think there's lessons we can learn from that. That's why I'm pleased to now lead the Graduate School of Political Management at George Washington University. My office is 4 blocks from the White House, and we teach politics. There are 242 schools in the country that teach policy, what you should do. We teach how you get it done, which we believe is essential. And our graduates learn to win campaigns, whether it be for electoral office, advancing legislation, impacting public opinion. And we are decidedly what we call full spectrum, not just bipartisan, because you got more than 2 parties in Japan, and we have Japanese students here, including Kawai-san. So we embrace all different points of view because we're not arguing about the what, we're studying the how. I say there is 3 types of people in this world. There are those that get things done, make things happen. There are those who watch things happen. And there are those like these ladies who say, what happened? That is true, I found in my life, but you need more than that. And so I say there's another rule of 3. And that rule of 3 is there are those that have a very firm idea as to which way we should go, but have a very tunnel vision and can't see why other people might think differently or how they can sell their idea to people that think differently. That's the first type. The second type are those that can see all kinds of different ways to go, many different options, but can't narrow it down to believing in one way. So they're stuck with just understanding all the options, but not knowing which way to go. And then there's the third type that have vision, more than just where to buy a house in Hong Kong, but vision to see what they want to do, what they think is the best path, but also the ability to see it from other people's angles and see how they can sell their view to others so that you can get the kind of majority you need to move it into action. So it's that third type that we're trying to look for. Climbing any hill is hard and requires a lot of effort because you will overcome obstacles. And as I say, I believe leadership is a lot like climbing those peaks. It begins with inspiring awe. When they first climbed, the people that first climbed Mount Everest did so with the intent to inspire awe, to have people that would follow along behind them and really take courage and inspiration from them. That's the type of leadership you want to begin with. When you start up a university like Globus, you do that ultimately with the goal of inspiring awe, to have your grandkids want to come to school here, and you talk about the fact that you went to school here. You want to tap into that superhero urge within everybody to really make a difference. Unfortunately, in our political environment in America and too many other things, what we're having in America for sure is we have spent so much of our kids' money and piled up so much debt that we've been taking a little bit of the easier way out, and they're not going to be so awed when they get the bill when they grow up and become our age. So the type of leadership we're seeing politically too often doesn't inspire that awe. The second thing you need to do is you need to reach for the highest peak. You don't, if you're really trying to inspire awe, say, I'm going to climb the second highest peak or the third highest peak. You may do it, but you'll do it as practice, as preparation, and getting in shape to climb that highest peak. This again we see in politics, that they think that winning the election is the highest peak. But in reality, why do you win elections? You win elections to govern. Governing trumps elections. And too often people win elections in a way that they don't have the flexibility to govern afterwards. So you want to be sure whatever it is you have in your life, recognize getting an MBA is not your highest peak. Getting an MBA is the practice peak that you want to do to get to something higher. Make sure you always keep your eye on that something higher. And we find in politics that campaign is the easy part. Campaign is like poetry. You campaign in broad, rich strokes that inspire people and get them all excited. But then you have to get down to governing, and governing is like prose. You have to deal in detailed, concrete words that give defined action as to how people would go, and it is much more difficult. They say you can lead a horse to water, but if you can get it to float on its back, you've really done something. Well, in many ways, campaigning is leading a horse to water. Getting it to float on its back is really governing, which is harder. So climbing that highest peak is what we're looking at. This is what it looks like in my home state of Minnesota right now. So if you think you're cold here, just know that it's really warm. What did Obama do? He did more than just win an election. He won an election. He arrived in the office in the middle of a financial crisis. He looked around and said, something needs to be done. He took an approach not everybody agreed with, but he took an approach and he passed a stimulus bill. So he climbed a higher peak than governing, than just winning the election. He also said there's something wrong with the financial system here. Again, disagreement, but got financial reform passed, a hill higher than winning elections. And as I'm sure you've heard a lot about, and you'll hear a little bit more about in this presentation and in the future, he passed health care reform. So there was 3 concrete things that he did beyond just winning elections to that higher peak. The negative side of this, if there's a lesson to be learned, at the same time he was doing all this, the people were saying, hey, the highest peak for us right now is the economy. It's getting this economy working, moving and getting a job back. That was the focus. So you will find that he had a lot of criticism then, and perhaps lingering now, that although stimulus, financial reform, healthcare reform are all higher peaks than winning the election, that wasn't the highest peak that many people had on their minds and drew a lot of that criticism. The third thing we need to do is we need to pack light. If you're climbing a mountain, if you've ever done that, you know that not having the right gear is a disaster. Having too much gear and gear you don't need can also weigh you down and keep you from reaching that highest peak. So you want to make sure that you're packing light and only that you really need to achieve the goal you're doing. Too often, politicians, business people, NGO leaders have what we say in America, your eyes are bigger than your stomach. You're putting more on your plate than you can ever eat. And this is really negative consequences in all forms of leadership. One example, you might know that we shut down our government in America. That was because a couple of senators knew that there was an urge that some wanted to, as it shows here, impeach Obama. Yes, we can. And they took that to try to eliminate Obamacare as opposed to just reform it. That was putting way too much on your plate. You were never going to achieve it. And in the end, we had a fruitless shutdown that never got anywhere. So it wasn't a win for the people that were pushing it. It wasn't a win for anyone. An example of how in politics, putting too much on your plate gets you to a negative consequence. If we look at Obama, where he did well here, the 2008 election, his historic victory was an example of just putting very few things on your plate. Many people campaigning against him said he only talked about one word, change. And he didn't tell you what change was or where it was going, he just said change. And the first thing you'll find is that in any campaign, talking about the least number of things is the better. And you as business leaders will find that your employees can get too confused if you're talking about too many priorities. And you're more likely to be complained to that there's too many things that you're asking me to do as opposed to not enough. So having that clear focus, the bigger the organization, the more important this is of picking just a short focus and a key priorities that you're going after and sticking to that is vital. And in this case, was highly successful for him winning that 2008 elections. Another example of, in the area of gay rights, when Obama first ran, even though he may have been for that when he first ran in 2008, he did not say he was for it. If he would have said he was for it, that might have put more weight on that issue in his campaign. He may not have won. And it may have actually hurt that cause if that was a cause you were interested in. In the end, he got what he wanted, but he chose not to put that on the plate right away, and by packing that light, in that case, wherever you stand on that issue, he was able to be more successful in great part because he packed light in his first campaign. The third area, and again, anytime you're dealing in politics, everything is controversial. He took a domestic focus. When he came to office, it wasn't just get out of Iraq. In many ways, he wanted to avoid the world from impinging on his strategy for changing America domestically. You saw that key focus on health care, on the financial reform, and he has other things he wants to do in America. And a key part of his focus was to say, I can't do all this if we, America, are distracted doing this, that, or the other thing around the world. So at least part of what's driving his foreign policy is a desire to keep the foreign policy from interfering on the domestic agenda that he has. You could argue whether that was the right thing to do, but for purposes of getting the domestic agenda passed, having that kind of focus is an example of packing light. Now the flip sides. We're looking at where he's done it right, where he maybe hasn't done it right. In his 2008 inaugural, he said, now there are some who question the scale of our ambitions, who suggest that our system cannot tolerate too many big plans. And he said, they're wrong because we have to do all these big plans. That was a classic example of putting way too much on the plate. And one thing, I don't know if you guys have studied capital asset pricing model yet in finance, but the one thing you find is what businesses hate most is uncertainty. Because uncertainty goes into risk, and if I have a higher risk, I have a higher cost of capital, and if I have a higher cost of capital, I have to ask for a higher return rate, and if I have a higher return rate that I have to get, I'm investing less. I'm doing less. I'm hiring less people. I'm investing in growth less. So part of what Obama did, given that economy was the highest peak, by putting health care, which costs businesses money, by putting financial services, which makes their reform, which makes their financing uncertain, by saying he wants to raise taxes, which increases the cost of their business. All of those are things in the end he ended up doing. But then to add on top of that, global warming and wanting to do cap and trade was another uncertainty, another cost. And if you just take that global warming piece, again, irrespective of what you believe on global warming, by putting too much on the conveyor belt, not only did that not get done, but many other things didn't get done. And he didn't get the economy going because there was another risk that made businesses sit on the sidelines. And he made his allies do very difficult votes that didn't result in anything other than many of them to lose an election, so that when he got past the 2010 midterms, he had less allies to work with. So again, a classic example of putting too much on the plate right out of the front. In politics, and my guess is in your business, there's a conveyor belt that has so much capacity. You can only put so much on that conveyor belt, and it's like a lane of cars. if it gets too crowded, nobody's going anywhere. And this was a case. Another example was right after his first re-election. His primary focus was getting the immigration bill done. That was what he came out of the second re-election with the focus on doing. And we had a very tragic accident, a very tragic tragedy in Connecticut, shooting in a school that said, I'm going to put guns on the conveyor belt. Again, irrespective of how you feel about guns, putting guns on the conveyor belt when he had relatively little political capital and he wanted to get immigration done meant neither guns nor immigration got done. So the challenge is you want to do everything now, but you have to get a wide group of people organized and coalesced and controlled into a certain direction. That takes time, that takes energy. You try to do too many of them, nothing gets done. And finally, in this category, his Syria red line. He didn't really want to have to do anything in Syria. And too often when you do an absolute red line on anything, it gets you in trouble. The first President Bush, who you saw the picture of earlier, said a no new taxes, read my lips, red line. And as a result, when he was forced to raise taxes later on, he didn't win re-election largely because of that. So you have to really understand it's good to have convictions, but have convictions on only those things that you truly have convictions on and you absolutely are never going to change. And limit the number of things that you're just putting a very strong red line on there, because red lines can come back and bite you if you don't really have the conviction to hold to that red line. And if you look at the few things that we really need to focus on, clearly jobs has got to be on that agenda. Finally, not finally, but the next step is you need to survey the terrain and adapt your team to meet that terrain. A mountain climber will spend a lot of time studying exactly what the terrain looks like and what they're up against, and then they'll make sure that the team they're bringing with on the way up the mountain gives them all the skills that they need to get there. Too often we find, certainly in politics, and my guess is in business, that there's too much of just a narrow focus, and they're not able to see beyond just their narrow focus and see that broader terrain. And you need to, in politics and business and life, have a broader team that'll get you to the end game and carry you across. You need to have that vision. That vision, as Jonathan Swift said, is the art of seeing what is invisible to others. Too many people can't see what those who disagree with them believe and why they believe it and what motivates them and how they can try to convince them that this different way could actually solve some of the things that they're motivated to do. And that's what you need. Clearly, when Obama first ran in 2008, and he said, when he won the Iowa primary, we are not a collection of red states and blue states. We are the United States of America. And in this moment, in this election, we are ready to believe again. He understood the train of the American people, and I think every American, perhaps everybody outside America, wanted to believe that. So that was a good reading of the train for the campaign. But then when you think about the train after the campaign, interestingly, in the first three things, this was a slide we've seen before, the stimulus, the financial reform, and the health care reform that he passed all of those without having one red vote in the House. So all of the 200 or so Republican House members opposed him in all three of those. So there was a very strong red and blue despite what he said in the campaign. That makes it harder for you to do a lot of the things we'll talk about in the future related to the economy, because those have to be bipartisan. If he really read the train ahead of time and knew that, he wouldn't be able to do it any other way. He was assessing it right. If not, perhaps some other actions could have been done. And as with everything, the challenge creates blame on both sides. Getting past it requires both sides to move. And it's what makes politics so difficult. Let's talk about one thing he did right. He played Clinton when it came to the fiscal cliff. What Bill Clinton was always very good at is finding some constituency on the other side that he could co-opt and go after an appeal to them and bring them onto his side. They called it triangulation or co-opting. And he knew that business leaders don't even want to think about having us go past a debt ceiling and not honoring the full faith and credit of the U.S. Treasury. He knew that the Republicans were going to try to use that as a wedge. So he very aggressively went after the business leaders, a core Republican constituency, and in the end forced their hands and forced the Republicans to increase taxes more than they wanted to. That was a very intelligent political move to look at the terrain, look at the team members you need. In this case, it was a team that wasn't normally on his side, to reach out and attract them onto your side, and by doing that, he won. Good example of matching the team with the terrain. A challenge on the gun side is a reflection of what we say in politics. Very competitive in America. You need both an inside game, one-on-one with each member of Congress, and an outside game, giving speeches, running TV ads, making sure that the general public is ginned up on your side. But you can't do it without one. You can't do it with just one. You really need both. And I do believe the same as in business. You need to be giving that broader message. But for each of your direct reports and your employees, you need to also be able to giving that connection. In the case of the guns, he had the outside game, giving all the speeches, but he never really took the time to go one-on-one with the members of Congress and the key swing votes on this, and that is part of what led to him not getting across the line on that. That impersonal connections is just as important as having the broader message right. And if you look at on Obamacare, in this case, he pulled together just the right team to get that across the line. Finally, finding the pass. Because if you think about getting to the top of Mount Everest, there's about 90 different ways that you can't get up Mount Everest. You can really only get it up through one pass. So you really have to look throughout the terrain and say, I have to come up through this angle, take a jog here, cut up this little crevice to get to the top. That's normally the way it works in life as well, in politics or business. So the key is to keep that focus on finding the pass. As a famous baseball player said, getting good players is easy, getting them to play together is the hard part. That's oftentimes what you need to do to find that pass. On Obamacare, if you watch the ebbs and the flows of it, Ted Kennedy's seat was taken over by a Republican who campaigned against Obamacare, saying he was going to be the one that stopped it. So Obama was faced with a very difficult situation. In the end, he found an unusual way to get it passed. It was important to him. He took an unusual way that didn't require the normal 60 votes in the Senate and only required 51, but it was an example of finding the pass. But I will say that if you look at your own Abe with his 3 arrows, that when you look at where we need to still find a pass, we at least have 3 arrows we need to fire in America that are the challenges and that are perhaps made more challenging in that they require true bipartisan support, which given the degree of contentiousness we've had in the past is making it difficult. The first of those is our fiscal crisis. We have a lot of debt. We have, when our baby boomers retire, a continuing deficit. It's not that hard to solve. It is hard, but it's possible to solve. The one benefit we have in America is we have a high number of young people. So our population is growing. If we got together and do it, the trouble is almost every Republican knows that in the end, the grand bargain is going to have to include more tax revenue. Almost every Democrat knows in the end, there's going to be having to be some modification to make to our retirement and health care security systems. If we tweak both those dials and everybody sort of makes a compromise, we can jump across the line and find the pass. And that needs a leader to do that. That's one of the three arrows that we need somebody, hopefully Obama, to pull everybody together and do. The second thing is immigration. America, as you probably know, has always been a land of immigrants. We find that the immigrants are great additions to our workforce and help drive a lot of the innovation that you see within America. And yet, we have a bill that passed with a high margin in the Senate that we haven't figured out how to get through the House. That also is something that's vital for us to do. And for us, I do believe that the trade agenda, we're talking with Japan and others about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We're talking with Europe about the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Those two trade deals, if we could get them through, trade is always contentious, would also, I think, help spark economic growth, not just in America and Japan, but around the world. So we've seen in the case of Obama some good pluses in terms of him using smart steps to get done what needs to get done. We've also seen perhaps some stumbles, all of which we can learn lessons from. We've seen some challenges ahead, but this is where you get back to those people that inspired awe. Because to get past those hurdles you have to get past, tapping into that energy of those who got past the hurdles help. I'm less familiar with Japanese history as I am with America, but I can tell you in America, when the Mayflower settlers came over half of the settlers died in that first winter. And yet they didn't turn back. They kept moving forward and helped to build America. When our first settlers got to the Mississippi River, it's a lot wider at St. Louis than it is here at its source, but they didn't say the river's too wide and turn back. They kept going. And when Thomas Edison created the light bulb, he failed 100 times, but he didn't quit. He kept going. And that keep on going till you get it is absolutely essential. And I'm confident that if you follow those same patterns of whatever you're trying to do in life, seek to inspire awe and have your kids say good things and grandkids say good things about it. Keep your eye focused on that highest mountain. Make sure that you're packing light and just focusing on the key priorities that you really want to have, as we say, on your gravestone when you get to the end of your life. Making sure that you're looking at the train necessary in front of you and matching a team to get you there. And in the end, find that pass. And I'm confident you do, that you'll have plenty of good leadership lessons that you'll be able to come back to Globus in another couple of years and share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kennedy. Mark. I was allowed to call him Mark, so I will call him Mark, and you can call me Yoshi for short. I enjoyed your speech, and I have 4 or 5 questions. First one is that you have become a politician. Before that, you were a business person, and you were the VP of Macy's, and you were working for Pillsbury. You had MBA. Why did you decide to become a politician?
Everybody's story is different. For me, there's 3 answers to that. Okay. First is, I am named Kennedy. I was 6 when John died, 12 when Bobby died, and all everybody would talk about was their admiration for their devotion to public service. Secondly, as I say, I have a good name for this new profession. Okay. My grandmother was Rose Kennedy, but her father wasn't mayor of Boston. He was county commissioner in Swift County, Minnesota, where I was born. Her husband was mayor of the little town I was born in. My dad was in the school board for 27 years. Okay. So I'm a 4th generation Minnesota public servant. It's kind of in the blood. Okay. And the third is I never left the state of Minnesota until I was 10. and I visited a Pearl Harbor veteran uncle in Virginia. And he took us to Williamsburg and Yorktown and Jamestown, historic towns, and one day to Washington. And inspired by the Founding Fathers with the tradition of service and the inspiration of the Kennedys, that is what motivated me to pursue public life.
Are you related to the ambassador of Caroline Kennedy here in Japan?
Somewhere way back when, our branches separated a while ago. I did when the governor Schwarzenegger, who was married to the Kennedy at the time, got elected. I was at his reception and congratulated Caroline on having another Republican Kennedy in the family.
Very good. What was difficult and different between being a business person to being a politician? And how is it like to be running for office in election?
Well, the two questions. The first question is, what's difficult is they don't have a bottom and sense ROI, bottom line, like you do in business.
Okay.
If one of the most frustrating things I faced when I was elected was a guy who made us stay over in Washington one more night so that we could have a vote. He talked about it all night. The next morning, he only got 1 out of 4 votes, only 1 out of 2 in his party. By any business measure, that's a loss. But for the people that really cared about that issue, he stood strong for it. He got a vote on it. He got people in the records on it, and it could have been a win for him, even though he lost 3-1. And so those people might be out there working hard for him and always campaigning and viewing him as their champion. So what's winning in politics seems very complex to a business person. The toughest part about campaigning is, as you can imagine, in my jobs, I had MBAs and lawyers working for me. The only way you win as a candidate is if you let what I call the 20-somethings tell you what to do. Because you're the product now.
Okay.
You need to let them plan your schedule.
Sure.
You need to let them do the marketing material.
Sure.
You have to be the one that's out there smiling, shaking hands, asking for people's votes, and asking for donations. And to move from telling MBAs what to do to have, young people telling me what to do in the campaign was a very hard. If you don't do it, they kept telling me, if you don't be the candidate, nobody else can be the candidate, you're going to lose. So I forced myself to listen to them, and it worked.
Very good. I was not really sure of where you stand in terms of Obamacare. Are you for or against, or it's not that simple?
It's not that simple. The most amazing thing to people outside of America is that half America doesn't want national health care, half America does. And there is a very angst against it. I had a different bill that I had a number of Democrats support me on that basically said, we're going to have everybody have health care, but we're going to give you a credit to buy it, so you can buy it from whoever you want, and if you have less income, we'll do it. There's so much things that are wrong with our health care system. This could take another session or two. But net, I think we need to have health care to more people, but I believe with most things that a more market-driven approach is a better approach and a strength of America. Not to pick on any of our people here, but we have one of our guests here is from Medtronic, which is the world's #1 medical equipment company in the great state of Minnesota. Why is it in the great state of Minnesota? Because we have a market-driven healthcare system that will give you a profit if you deliver a competitive product that will save people's lives. If everything is boiled down to government-run, you're going to boil that profit out of there, and there may not be as much innovation in the Medtronics or the Pfizers of the world. So I think part of what is hard to understand is taking all the profit out of healthcare, taking all the incentive out of healthcare may not be the best result for healthcare around the world, because you may have less innovation that'll save your kid from a death that could have been saved if they had innovation. Longer answer to follow if you want it.
That's okay. I just want to ask one more question about the political position. How do you see Tea Party movement? Do you think it's good or do you think it's bad, or you are in between?
I'm not in between.
Okay.
I mean, they have the Tea Party on the right, the Occupy movement on the left. As a business person, you want to get things done.
Yeah.
You don't want any of these votes where you get 1 out of 4 and call that a victory. You want to get it done and sign in the law. That never happens with 60 votes being required in the Senate unless I not only have all of my party and a slice of the other party. So when you split your party in half, your party never wins, much less get anything done. Let me give you 2 examples on how, as a person that ideologically is a conservative, thinks the Tea Party, who claims to be conservatives, has been very good for the liberals. Because when we had the first debt ceiling, the Speaker of the House wanted to try to solve it. He could have solved it, but the Tea Party wouldn't support him. So he had to give the solution over to the democratically controlled Senate. As a result, we got a sequester that cut defense spending by far more than would have otherwise happened if the Tea Party would have worked with their own leader. Republicans are supposedly for more defense spending. The Tea Party's result of not being cooperative ended up getting a liberal result. When we had the fiscal cliff that we just talked about, the Speaker wanted to raise taxes on those north of $1 million. The Tea Party didn't support him. So we ended up having taxes raised on everybody north of 400,000. So more people have higher taxes, and we have less defense spending because of Tea Party, both of which they were against, but because the Tea Party used bad politics, they did not follow peak leadership. They got the opposite result of what they were looking for.
Okay. Let me move on to more foreign relationship, like foreign affairs. Now, looking from Japan, the U.S. may not have a strong China strategy. That's what we see is happening. What do you think is the U.S. position in terms of China strategy? Because China is going to become stronger, and then in terms of economy, it's being forecasted that it will exceed the size of the U.S. in 2040 or 2050. And what do you think the U.S. should be doing in terms of China? Because in case of Japan, we have an issue about Senkaku Island. And Senkaku was occupied by the U.S. after the war and has been handed over to Japan. But the U.S. does not stand where the Senkaku belongs to. It doesn't say it's Japan's. And that's, is maybe from Japanese point of view, is seeing that the U.S. does not stand strong behind Japan. So how do you say about that?
Again, a couple questions. First of all, if you think about America's China strategy, we perhaps have a stronger China strategy than we talk about. Because if America came out here and said our strategy is to contain and circle this, the Chinese talk about this, us circling them. We want to have a strong relationship with Japan. We want to have a strong relationship with Korea. Vietnam and the Philippines are also upset with China about their own land disputes in the South China Sea. We want to have a strong relations there. We want to keep our strong relations with Thailand. We want to at least neutralize India, and therefore we have China surrounded. If we said that affirmatively, if that was our strategy, it would make China feel even more nervous and increase the likelihood that there would be a conflict between us. I mean, I think the biggest issue in our future moving forward is how do we have China rise without it resulting in a conflict? Or as I say more personally, how do I make sure that my son, who's the Navy pilot, comes and visits your country on vacation, not on the job? And so it's perhaps wise for America to be more nuanced in what its strategy really is. Secondly, as it relates to the islands, we have a treaty. The islands are covered under the treaty. Yeah. I think all Americans know that. And part of what I've been talking to, I met with both your major parties, with your chamber today, better educating Americans on the China-Japanese relations, I think helps the Americans all understand that too. So I think we are committed, but I think there are some actions that sometimes in America appears to be more poking the other side in the eye that, given that we're on the hook to help defend those, we wonder about.
Okay. So the next question is on your capacity as director of George Washington Graduate School of Political Management. You said that there are lots of political graduate schools, and they talk a lot about policy, but your school talks about politics. What is so much different, and what is so unique about your school?
Well, we suggest that the policy, there's 242 policy schools, teach people to come up with policies. But if you look at almost every issue we face, they don't remain unsolved because we don't have any policy solutions to solve them. We got more policy solutions already than we know what to do with. And everybody has their perfect policy solution. You have yours, I have mine. But none of that happens unless you reconcile those and get the politics right. Okay, we want to get some variant of yours passed. Who are the members we're going to get? What coalitions are we going to pull together? What messaging strategy are we going to do? All of those is politics. The how is politics. The what is policy. The conflict over what never results to action unless you get the how right. So we say politics trumps policy. We're the ones who are really going to determine what's happening. So we're very excited to be the premier school in that.
I think it's easier to teach policy, but it's difficult to teach politics. How do you teach politics?
It begins with understanding the building blocks and components. How do you develop the right message? What should your message strategy be? How do you phrase that message? Which target groups then do you go after with that message? And you may have to explain it different to different segments of the population. If you're doing the island strategy in America, there may be 5 different reasons why different segments of America is for you. If you're not explaining to each segment exactly, this is because it's our commitment, this is because it helps contain China, this is because the Japanese have always been strong allies and friends to us. There might be different messages that work with different segments. That's part of politics. You've got to figure out what is that message you're saying to, who are you saying it to, who should be the person delivering it, in what repetition, and what are the coalitions I need in order to achieve this? Who are the different groups that I really need to make sure I get? Because almost every political issue, there are those that are against you, there are those that are for you, and there are those that are in the middle that you can persuade. And how can you persuade them? So this is an example of the types of things that we study. You give us the what, we'll dissect it, analyze it, come up with a strategy, come up with the execution steps you need to take to get there.
Last question. I heard that you are seeing a very important person in Prime Minister's office tomorrow. What are you going to say? What are you going to say to him or her? And what is the advice you want to give to the Japanese government?
Well, I would, in terms of sell to them, we have a Trans-Pacific Partnership hopefully going to happen. If the Trans-Pacific Partnership happens, and I think it would strengthen Japan, would strengthen America, would strengthen the world, what that strength comes from is having our regulations look a lot closer to each other. That requires more people in Japan that understand how we make regulations in America, and more people in America that understand how we make regulations in Japan. In many ways, changing those is politics. We would love to help train both of those. In terms of giving advice to the Prime Minister, he has some tough arrows to shoot. Making sure that they happen is going to be difficult. I frankly think the regulatory piece, the deregulation, changing some of the structures of your regulations that prevent growth are going to be the hardest, but the most important. So I would tell them, hold firm on the reforms that are really going to loosen up the economy to allow Japan to grow again.
Okay, now I'd like to open up to the floor to ask questions. So please introduce yourself and ask questions to Honorable Mark Kennedy. Anybody?
I work for a PR company, so
Edelman.
I'm
Let
going
me
to.
just say, Edelman is a
Edelman.
fine firm. Edelman is a fine firm. And we, for the second year in a row, will be hosting their trust survey in Washington with a unique focus on government trust. So in our business, it's a very strong piece of intellectual property, and we appreciate the good work
Good to
your firm
hear.
does.
Thank you.
What a coincidence, because Globus is hosting Edelman Trust in
Japan.
February 5th, wasn't it?
So-
On February 5th.
Yeah.
We'll be
so-
at February, I believe, 18th in Washington.
Oh, I see. Okay, so we can exchange views about Japan and the U.S.
Great.
Okay, right.
Okay. Looking at President Obama and Prime Minister Abe, I think one thing that Prime Minister Abe has done extremely well is define his own story. He's been very good at honing those messages and making sure that he's the one who's communicating his story. It seems very much to me that President Obama has let others define his story, and that has in sometimes meant that he's had more luggage on that conveyor belt than he actually wanted to have there. I just want to know if your view. President Bush, on the other hand, was extremely good at defining his own story.
You know, campaigns, governing is all about the story, which is why you need to hire smart people like Edelman that hires smart people at George Washington University's Graduate School of Political Management to staff them to help you tell your story. And in many ways, they say a campaign for president is about a life story. Who has the better life story that you're selling? The idea of the three arrows, which from what I understand goes deep into Japanese history and has reinforcing messages in people's mind that makes this strategy sound like a good strategy, is a very wise move on Obama, on Abe's part. And it's also a focusing strategy, because if it's not the three arrows, you shouldn't be focusing on it. And so you're right, Obama hasn't really given that broad vision, narrowed down to just three items, and say, this is what I'm going to do that's going to move America into the next century, with us still being the #1 country in the world and China not. If that's a story that, if Obama could enunciate that, would help him gather people to his side, would help him decide, what am I going to do, what am I not going to do? And he gave a great story in his first campaign. But he's got to get back to storytelling.
There's a hand up over there. Yes.
Thank you today. My name is Masakazu Noguchi, work for Abbott Laboratory Marketing. And my question is, what do you think about Japanese political marketing? Because last year you came to Japan, and I know you talked with a lot of Japanese political parties. And Japanese parties recently use a lot of social media, or a lot of tools. What do you think about Japanese political marketing?
Let me just say that you're very good at marketing, because you know I'm from Minnesota, and the Minnesota Vikings color is purple, so you wore purple just for me. That's exactly the type of targeted marketing we like to see. Japan is, even by most politicians' admission, way behind on political marketing. And it's partly behind because there's restriction on campaigning here that we don't face in America or in many other countries. And they just opened up the digital campaigning this year for the first time in the consular's election. And actually, I was just over in Korea, because Korea has been doing more digital campaigning in elections than you have been for longer, and I think have learned some lessons. They are also facing restrictions. And if you think about Japan's, from an outsider's, two biggest challenges, you're one of the few countries in the world that has more debt as a percent of GDP than America. You also, unlike America, don't have a robust young population. You have an aging population. The combination of that debt and an aging population means that the next decade or two, the government is going to have to tell you no more times than they want to tell you no. That is going to make the population have angst with the government. And if you want to keep a strong, stable government, that government needs to communicate more robustly with its citizens to help explain what's going on, get their input, maneuver through these rocky shoals in a way that everybody's feeling comfortable. So I think one of the elements that's vital for a strong, cohesive, vibrant Japan is more robust two-way communications between the political leaders and the citizens of Japan. And so as a school, that this is one of the things we do particularly well. We would love to help Japan in any way we could in that regard.
Could you please be more specific about where Japan runs behind in terms of digital campaigning? Which area do you think Japan can be much more advanced in?
Well, part of it is, and it's a different view of privacy perhaps as well. In America, we have voter files that are available to the public. So a campaign can walk in and know, do you vote? Have you voted in the last 4 elections? If you haven't, I'm not going to pay any attention to you. I'm going to pay attention to him who voted in all 4 of the last elections. So, and then I can know, if you haven't voted in the last 4 elections, what would motivate you to vote? What message could I deliver to you? What do you care about? That kind of information we have in America and many other countries, but they don't have a voter file here. Many European countries have overcome that. Interestingly, in Korea, they made using private data to target market to citizens in Korea, I was told, was made illegal.
Oh, is that right?
So in America, if you signed on to Obama's website and I signed on Obama's website, even the first time we signed on, we would see different pages. Because they would know something about where you're coming from, about what you care about. And if you care about foreign policy for America, you're going to get a foreign policy message right up front. If I care about taxes, I'm going to get a tax message right up front. And you know what? You and I are both going to feel more connected, in this case to Obama, than if we got the, a policy that we didn't really care about sticking us right up front. So those types of things that both due to restrictions that are in place that you just don't have here.
Is it more like, I'd like to know more about that system. It seems quite interesting that if I sign up, I don't, in signing up, I don't write any kind of questionnaires. But the system will understand by reflecting onto the voter file, and then the system will know what I care about. It
might be scary if you knew what we knew about you in America, because they may have already matched up voter files with email addresses.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So even though you never signed up to Obama before, they've already matched your voter file with emails. They also, for example, this is way back in 2004, the reason Bush won re-election in 2004 is he was ahead of the curve technologically by getting a lot of consumer data. If you drive a Volvo and you subscribe to Wine Connoisseur, you're probably a Democrat. And they could take those types of inferences, run them against regression analysis and focus groups and say, these types of attributes lead to this type of issues being important to you and this type of voter behavior. And it is uncanny how accurate they can be.
When you were running for office, what you felt worked? Was it a speech? Was it like a small group of or is it more digital marketing? What worked and what you felt did not work well?
It begins with having your wife let you run. That's the first thing that's important. I quit a job as a corporate executive making about 3 times more than a congressman makes to run against a 4-term incumbent. 1.5% of challengers win. I won. Now, part of it is because I'm a businessman, and if you're running an open seat, you first of all have to win the primary, and to win the primary, you either have to be the far left of the left or the far right of the right, and I'm neither. I would just as soon focus on climbing that highest peak afterwards and getting things done, so I took on a challenger. I was in a rural district. I shook, I think, every hand that voted for me.
Okay.
290,000 votes. We'd go to a parade. I'd start out before the parade began and shake every hand down one side, shake every hand down the other side. Another group came and put a Kennedy sticker on you. Another group gave you a Kennedy football schedule, and then the truck came through. So she saw me 4 times. And in my case, I was able to run a grassroots campaign, shaking the hand, asking for their vote.
Okay. So you felt that shaking hands worked the most.
Personal connection, they
Personal
saw
connection.
you, is as
Okay.
good as, it's a rural district that does a lot of parades. If you're in an urban district that doesn't go to parade, you can't do that. So like everything, as we talked about in peak leadership, you have to look at the train and match your strategy to the train. It's a strategy that worked in my district, and I was pleased to run it.
Okay. Yes.
I really don't need a mic.
But for the sake of
For the video, please
video.
use the mic. Thank you.
Okay. Here's my question. I haven't lived in the state. My name is Ansel Simpson. I haven't lived in the States for 13 years, I guess. And so I really look at the presidency as more as a conductor. And based on what Obama has done, do you think that the business landscape or people involved in business look at Black Americans any differently from the position of leadership? How do you think his presidency, his being a president, how has that affected how business people look at Black Americans as leaders?
Well, amongst the big achievements of the Obama presidency is breaking through that glass ceiling. In that regard, I think it has to be viewed as positive. For better or for worse, taking on the issues of the African American community has not been a priority for him, and some have complained about that. But I don't think that lessens in any way the fact that him being who he is and having achieved what he's done twice, winning 2 elections, being a 2-term president, and as I say, accomplishing an agenda, has got to show you that there is really no limits to where African Americans can go. And so I would have to believe that that's a very positive thing.
Yes, thank you. My name is David Villagomez. I'm an Ecuadorian diplomat. I've been posted here to Japan a little bit over a year ago now. So, Mr. Kennedy, you talked on a couple of occasions about TPP. I wanted to know, I recently read this article by Reuters criticizing very strongly the New York Times, which is a very known independent media, one could say, for their defense on TPP and how it would increase livelihoods of basically everybody, all the countries involved in it. Nevertheless, what Reuters criticized so much was that, in fact, supposedly the text being negotiated is not available to anybody. It is not being negotiated, once again, supposedly, either by Senate, Congress, or even the USTR. But, as they would put it, by corporations itself. If that would be the case, I'd like to know, please, what's your point of view on what kind of leadership view President Obama would be portraying of himself when he has so much criticized corporations and their own endless need for gains.
So
Thank you.
I'm going to assume that you meant that that in a Reuters article they quoted somebody as saying that, and that I'm not sure that Reuters, which would typically be pro-business, would be giving that view. When you look at TPP, it has a lot of opponents. If you're for the opponents, hire a graduate school of political management, we'll help you oppose it. If you're for those who are for it, hire somebody from our graduate school of political management, we'll have somebody that can help you. It's going to be a big battle when it comes. There is no doubt. The opponents don't know what it is. Neither do the proponents. And I don't think the businesses are allowed to be there any more than in the conversations, more than the NGOs that are against it. But my guess is that when they did their messaging strategy of how do you oppose TPP, you can't say I don't want TPP because of X, Y, or Z, or nobody will understand it. You have to come up with something very simple that can appear devious and detach people from an affection for TPP. So my guess is it's being done in secret behind closed doors. We don't know what's going on. It should be open, is a very deliberate and effective messaging strategy. Because what they know is it's tough to do a trade agreement. It's tough to get nearly 20 countries to agree on anything. And if every time they jot and tittle, you can get your activist groups ginned up opposing it, it'll never get to the point of getting to a vote. So they recognize that it's not only a very attractive thing to have as a messaging strategy, but if responded to, would also be very effective at killing the deal, which is their goal to begin with. So from a political analysis perspective, I see it as a political analysis, as a political move on the part of the opponents that Obama is rightly, at this point, if he wants a deal, ignoring.
Any other questions? Yes. And yeah, okay.
Thank you.
One each. You have a microphone? It's okay. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Yoshi Akano, visiting professor of Takushaku University. What do you think about the influence of the defense budget cut of the federal budget upon the rebalancing strategy of the Obama administration? And my second question is, which party will win in the next presidential election? Or the
And you want to know
Republicans
you want to know
or
the person too,
Democrats?
or?
It's very hard to answer.
When you say the rebalancing strategy, you're talking about the pivot towards Asia, or when you say rebalancing strategy, what do you mean?
The military strategy in the Asia-Pacific region.
Yes. So one sort of key, if you were Obama, having my voter file and background on me, if you knew I had a son in the Navy, that would be enough information for you to know that I don't think very much about cutting the defense budget, particularly when it affects the kind of resources my son has around him and his capacity to do the job. We constantly get in these lulls into believing that conflict has ended. A professor from NUS just wrote a book saying interstate war is extinct. And I'm saying it's a very happy thought. Let's hold that thought for about 90 seconds and then say, what happens if it's not? And so let me just give you one other sort of thing to worry about. Let's just say, if you look at China, we come from a democracy. Japan's a democracy. We think sooner or later, a lot of people want to be a democracy. If you want to have innovation drive your economy, you need to have a more open society. If you hit that middle income ceiling right now, you can get the affections of your people through one of three ways. You can have them be representative. We are frustrated as can be with what's going on in Washington, but we all know as Americans, we voted for them. So they're still legitimately elected, so we have to put up with them. Representative. The other way is repression, which we've seen. The third way is delivering results. China is gathering the affection of its people by delivering results. At some point, if you hit that middle income ceiling because you can't get past it because you don't have an open economy and you don't have innovation to drive the economy and you don't get the results and people are a bit more middle class wanting more representation, what happens? do they move towards a more representative government? Right now, there's not a lot of Chinese that really like Americans. There are some, but I mean, they have a degree of sort of, they clearly, I can tell you, they're really fans of Japan in China. And could we get a representative government that's perhaps less bridled, but equally as aggressive or more aggressive? So there are many reasons to say we want peace. The best way to have peace is to have a strong military. So I think the world is still uncertain enough that America needs to be defending very strongly in its own military, that Japan-American relationship has to be as tight or tighter than it is now. We would say the same with Korea and many others for just that. Your second reason as to who's going to win, unfortunately, there's a very big frustration against Obama right now. His poll ratings right now are not much higher than Bush's were at the same point. Most people expect the Republicans to win strongly in this upcoming midterm election. But people might feel as if they've already sort of done the whack at the frustration, which means it'll be even harder for Republicans to win 2 years down the road. If Hillary Clinton wins, never having had a female president, there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to say it really would be nice for America to join that club. And Hillary has a great level of experience. You can't say that she's not qualified to be. She is going to be very formidable to win. I think perhaps one of the best chances for a Republican victory is for the Democrats to end around from the left on Hillary as Obama did in the last election. So the things to watch out for is, will somebody end around Hillary if she does win? That could be decisive, because a Democrat's going to perhaps have an easier time beating Hillary than a Republican is. The second thing to watch for is who is the Republican standard bearer or the Democratic standard bearer will be likely those that 2014 congressional candidates find most helpful in their campaigns. Who are they calling up the phone and saying, could you come here and help campaign for me? It has a real effect. So I think watching the 2014 campaigns will allow you to have a better idea as to who would be our standard bearer and get a better sense of, can they beat the Democrat opponent?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Ahmed. I'm a diplomat at the Embassy of Egypt in Tokyo, and at the same time, part-time MBA student at Globus. So in business, when a company or a product reaches the top and becomes a leader, we learned here that it tries through effective marketing strategies to maintain on the top as long as possible. But the trend that we saw in the American policy, especially for the president's position, that the maximum that any party stayed at the top was 8 years. And usually there is a change after the 8 years. Was that due to like campaigning fatigue? The party gets tired of campaigning for 8 years, or due to lack of achievements and not meeting the expectations of the voters, or just simply that the people want change? How do you see this? How can a party stay in power for longer time than the 8 years and capitalize on the achievement that they did? This is the first question. If you allow me a second one. The second one is, in 2001, the U.S. started war on terrorism in Afghanistan and later in Iraq in 2003. 10 years later, and they were fighting Al-Qaeda, of course.
We would suggest that maybe we didn't start it, but we engaged in the war on terrorism.
They were engaged. 10 years later, President Obama and the U.S. were on the verge of fighting in Syria with Al-Qaeda. What happened to the American policy during these 10 years? How did you reach this point? Thank you.
The first question is, you named about 3 possible reasons for why we oftentimes don't have 3 different, the president from the same party 3 times in a row. All 3 of those are true. You know, the fatigue, the other thing that I would add to it is people are attached to an issue. When you achieve that issue, in many cases, Obama has achieved some of the things he set out to be, so therefore they're satisfied. At the same time, that activates people on the other side that want to achieve the issue of reversing what he just did, or of achieving some other issue that he's ignored for 8 years. So in terms of building up motivated pools of people that will engage in a campaign, the achievement over the 8 years mitigates the number of animated people you have, and the lack of achievement on other issues animates a pool on the other side. So in terms of why it seesaws back and forth between two, that's part of it. It would be fair to say that the level of frustration with Obama right now would mean that Republicans would almost surely win in the next election for president, but for the fact that Hillary Clinton has to be viewed as a very, very strong candidate. Next issue, if you wanted to talk about one of those issues that is boiling up on the right and making people very frustrated and animated, is the second question you asked. What are we even thinking of doing, fighting on behalf of Al-Qaeda folks in Syria? As I mentioned, it appears largely Obama took the point of view, I want to focus on domestic. I want to rebuild, do nation building at home, as he said many times in the campaign. I think even more frustrating than Syria for us is to see what's happening in Iraq. Because you could have a strong argument as to whether America should have gone into Iraq. We could be here tonight and tomorrow and to the next day arguing about that. You would have a lot harder time arguing that the surge didn't make sense. And as you heard Secretary Gates say his frustration with hearing that both Obama and Clinton said they agreed that the surge made sense, but they were opposing it on political grounds. But even more frustrating than that is that they didn't take the time and the difficulty to negotiate a basing agreement in Iraq. Because now that Fallujah and Ramadi are back in the hands of the other side, causing trouble, destabilizing Iraq, I think it'd be easier to say how if we just had a few folks sitting in the corner of Ballah, that Iraq and the region would be more stable, and maybe Syria would not have gone the way it did if we had. I'm not suggesting that's the case, but I don't think it was attempted. The track record of we still have troops in Japan, we still have troops in Korea, that seems to have worked out well for America and Korea and Japan. And I know there's dispute amongst the parties as exactly what that relationship should be, but I think it has proved highly beneficial. Foreign policy is an area that is very much animating conservatives that are very frustrated with what's happened in the last several years, and particularly in the case you mentioned.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Yuichi Enomoto. My question is about your country's, my question is about the leadership in your country's president.
My country's?
Oh, your president.
President.
Yeah. I really appreciate you could tell your opinion regarding who is the leader of leaders in your country's president history and why you think so.
Well, I would suggest amongst the leaders of leaders has got to be more recently Reagan. The reason George Herbert Walker Bush won for the third Republican in a row is not because of George Herbert Walker Bush, it's because people viewed that as the third Reagan term. And if you think of Reagan, he regularly got criticized for being, not as smart, and he wasn't conversant on all these other issues, very similar to the way Bush was. But people say that Reagan came into office with 3 things to do, and I can't remember what the third one was. He wanted to reduce the size of government and defeat the Soviet Union. If there was a third, I missed it. And if there was anything other than that, he wasn't able to talk intelligently on it because he just didn't care. Those are the 2 things that he wanted to do. And I did my first studying abroad in Europe in 1982, and I arrived in the Netherlands to study abroad right after Reagan gave his speech in Westminster on the evil empire, and all the Europeans were very nervous that Reagan was going to start World War III, and they were all complaining to me about Reagan and how bad he was. And one of the big thrills of my time in Congress was I got to take my daughter to Reagan's funeral. And she got a chance to meet every president, vice president, and first lady since she was born. I stood a little closer to her when I introduced her to Clinton than when I introduced her to Carter. And I mused, I laughed at myself of here were all these European heads of state there for Reagan, even though they spent their whole careers complaining about him. And Reagan is perhaps an epitome of the peak leadership. He knew what his highest mountain was. He wasn't going to let anything else bother him. He knew what team he needed to do in order to achieve that, and he did it. So, you know, he still, unfortunately, didn't cut the deficit as much as he should have and didn't do a lot of other things like he should have. But in the few areas that he looked at, he did achieve those. So that would be just one example of a leader. My kids tease me because I love to play Trivia Pursuit, and they say the answer is always easy. It's either Winston Churchill, John F. Kennedy, or Theodore Roosevelt. So I could expound on those three if you wanted me to, but there have been good leaders. And Obama still has the chance to be a great leader. I outlined his 3 arrows. If he do those 3 arrows, they will increase the likelihood that history books will view him as great, and they will also increase the likelihood that Democrats will take a 3rd term.
Maybe 1 or 2 more questions. One? Who else has questions? Okay, let's go on.
My name is Komura, working for KPMG. Actually, I just have 2 questions. One is I just read the article that the number of the independent, which is non-Democrat and non-Republican, are increasing in the U.S. So, well, I've just read the article. So could you just give me the reason why it happens? And the second question is, in Japan, you know, we have many small parties. So could you just give us your insight, which is good or which is not good?
You have more
Well, many small parties,
small parties.
in political parties.
On the independents, we go through this every election. People that have voted 4 times for the last 5 for the same party, having their own party not do so well, all of a sudden decide they're independent. But when they come back to voting, more likely than not, they're going to vote the way they did when their party gets their act together and has a better message to tell them. So if you like at the cycle of campaigns, when you get about 3 weeks out from the 6 weeks out, you'll all be talking about how many undecided people, and 3 weeks out, you'll be talking about the vanishing independent. Yes, there is independence, but I don't know that it's greater. There's more people calling themselves independents when their own party is in a tough spot. They're not committed partisans, but they're a lot of folks heavily lean, and it's really probably 10% or less in the middle that's truly independent. There are advantages and disadvantages to 2-party system versus a multi-party system. A 2-party system, it's really hard to get the 60 votes in the Senate, but if one folks decides they want to do that, there's less moving parts so you can get it done. So how quickly after we had the budget shutdown, how all of a sudden they were able to figure out how to get things done. There's a lot less moving parts. The flip side about it is not everybody is a Republican or Democrat. There are economic conservatives, social liberals that don't feel as if they have a home. And the reverse. There are, they don't feel at home in either party. And so there's multiple different parties, allows each person to feel at least connected to the party. And when you have multiple parties, you can put the chess pieces together to get to go if you have a strong leader in perhaps an easier way. So there are some countries that have a weird, it's almost starting a business and running it is a business because you get a fixed number of TV time, and you can sell your TV time to the bigger party if you get a party started. That's a problem they have in Brazil. But I see nothing wrong with the multiple parties you have in Japan, and it can work very effectively, and we're hoping we watch it work very effectively in the year ahead.
Okay, yes.
Thank you. I'm a student of this school, and I'd like to ask about the islands and matter. And I have friends, Chinese and Korean friends, and they are always ask me to apologize first, apologize. Koreans are very noisy about the apologize matter. And always say, so I will always say that in reply that 800 years ago, Chinese and Korean forces invaded Japan, and I didn't hear any apology for that, So you apologize first, and then I apologize to you. But the issue was talked when the special lecture like this one this evening for about 4 months ago by the Chinese some leader president dealing with these business in China, Japan, and the United States. And he said that they are a different dynasty, so we don't have to apologize for that. And now Mr. Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, went to worship the which shrine was it? Yasukuni Shrine. And then the Chinese were very anxious about it, and very condemning that they are worshiping the crime of the war. But what we have learned, we have taught is that what's wrong with the worshiping or give some respect to the people who has lost their lives during the fought for our nation. And that's the logic of the Japanese side. But when Abe has went to...
Can you please state your question?
Yeah, so sorry. That the United States also have claimed that that's disappointing. So I think Mr. Abe or the other world's opinion is that the loser is Japan, world loser, has to follow the rules of the losers.
Let me try to take a crack at answering what may or may not have been a question in there. But on all these issues, part of peak leadership is to look for the win-win. How can we have a win-win? And this whole island thing, we have to admit, is confusing or less understood by Americans. I just came from Korea, and I was interested when I went to the Korean War Memorial, how they have right at the entrance their version of their islands that are in dispute with you, with all of the young kids getting up and taking pictures besides the islands. And then I took a tour of the assembly building in Seoul for the Korean Assembly, and on the second floor, they had very few pictures there, but what they did have a picture of is the island that were in question. So this is obviously taken on a metaphor for more than even just the islands in both the cases of the dispute between Korea and Japan and China and Japan. So I haven't unwoven how do we try to find a win-win and have these not unravel into something bigger, because I don't think that any of us want to have any conflict to be coming out of any of these. but what is the underlying angst that's causing so much energy being attached by so many people in so many countries? And is there anything we can do as sort of a mediator to try to help this from boiling over? Because yes, we are committed, but yes, none of us really want to have to get into the point where we have to go over the line.
Yes, I think one suggestion for you is that to teach Mr. Abe or the leaders of the Japanese government about the rules of the losers or the how to deal with the criminal of the war. Because if the German high officials have expressed some sentiment to the Nazi Hitler, what happened with I think it will be the answer for this.
We could write a whole book on those types of issues, and we may not have time to fully answer the question, but I'm quite hopeful that we can find a path towards resolving those in a way that other than conflict.
Okay, Brian?
Okay, thank you. Since I'm American, I would like to have the honor to ask you a question. Part of this seminar is also branding, and is marketing. And politics and marketing both have branding, but sometimes if you lose a campaign or your product isn't doing well, you have to change your message, or you have to be rebranding, or you have to take a product that hasn't been doing so well and give it a new message. Is there any suggestion, hints, strategies, tactics you teach in your school to help rebrand someone who's lost a campaign, or that we can use as business professionals to help reinvigorate a product that might have not been doing so well recently?
Well, first of all, differentiation is the key to success in any branding. I like being the first and foremost school of applied politics. It's a lot better than being the second, of anything. And so find where you can differentiate and be the best. I would say in politics, it doesn't always mean you need to rebrand. Winston Churchill, for a decade, was in the wilderness because his brand wasn't selling. But he stuck to his brand, and when there came a point in time in politics when the world needed that brand, he was the natural go-to person. But let me just also say the Republicans' brand, as an example, was damaged in the Bush years for spending too much. So they said, we got a problem with our brand. We're supposed to be the party of spending less. Everybody thinks we spent too much. What do we do about that? Part of the reason you saw all the Republicans vote against the stimulus bill, all the Republicans vote against the health care bill, is because they knew they had a brand problem. And they knew the best way to create a brand problem is to create a sharp distinction, a sharp differentiation on exactly the point you're going to do. So in a business, if you have a brand that's sort of lost its way, try to find out what residual image you still have that you can burnish, and try to figure out what sort of exaggeration on that issue you can create that maybe the metaphor that reestablishes that brand, whether it be quality, whether it be a delivery of service in a particular area or otherwise. But I strongly believe that every product, every business, if you focus on what customers am I serving, what attributes am I appealing to, what regions of the world am I going after, that you can find a segment where you can position yourself as being the best in that, and start from there, build that strength, and build from that strength.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay, maybe the last one. Okay.
So my name is Tomizawa, business skill instructor. So thank you for the impressive story and presentation. I'm impressed by the difference between policy and politics. So what is the point for business person or MBA graduates to study politics?
Well, I will tell you this, that if you want to be CEO, you're going to need to study politics. So let me give you your path to the CEO. Actually, to have a Globus University, you had to deal with a couple of governments in order to get them authorized as a university, get the right to build in this space, deal with the legal and political issues of hiring people, of all of that. And you'll find that you first develop a skill in a specific area, finance, operations, marketing, whatever it is. You become very good at that, and all of a sudden your managers say, they're very good, they're showing some flexibility, let's try to broaden them out and get them multifunctional experience. If you get to that multifunctional experience, then you start moving up into general management. And when you move into general management, you're going to find that market strategy and non-market strategy, dealing with the political, the regulatory, the media, the activist groups, need to be meshed together for optimum results, and only general managers can do that. So we're clearly training a lot of government affairs executives and international affairs executives that could turn to general management, but you are going to want to learn that non-market strategy piece of it. A friend of mine is on the board of Wells Fargo, which at one point was the highest market cap, and he says we spend almost half of our time at the board level on those political issues as opposed to the bread and butter business issues. So to be a well-rounded C-suite person, get the market right, get your expertise in business, but also pay attention to what's going on in the world about you. And we're happy to help in whatever way we can. And pleased to be here and appreciative of the hospitality and congratulating Globus on the great success, and look forward to continuing watching its future success.
Thank you. Please give round of applause to Director Mark Kennedy, and thank you very much. I hope you'll come back again. And it was very insightful, and I have learned a lot, and I think all of you have learned a lot as well. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.